Afternoon. Welcome to our procurement webinar, co-hosted by PTI and procurementexpress.com. My name is James Kennedy. I'm the CEO and founder at procurementexpress.com. I'm here in the offices in South Africa with my colleague Dumisani. I'm very honored today to be joined by a thought leader in the procurement space, Mike McGrath. Mike is going to introduce himself in a couple of seconds and walk us through some very valuable material. This session should take about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes. Dumisani will be manning the chat, so if you want to type any questions you have into the chat there, we'll have time to circle back on them at the end. But now I'd just like to introduce Mike. Maybe Mike, you can just tell us a bit more about yourself and what PTI is, and let's get stuck into the content.
Sounds good. James, thank you very much for hosting us today. Delighted to have the opportunity to share some tips and advice in sourcing and tendering. It is a passion of mine. It's been an interest for the last number of years, so glad to share some value for your members. PTI is a new entity. It's a not-for-profit. Actually, it has collaborated and developed with UCC, the University in Cork, and it's about training and development for procurement professionals. So I can introduce that as well in the slides. This is a sample of what we're doing in terms of providing training, be that classroom training or online training. That's the space we're in with PTI.
Great. And just because I just want to say, while you're getting the slides up there, it's just pure coincidence we're both Irish. This isn't just an Irish procurement professionals, right? This is stuff that's applicable to everyone.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. All they have to do is understand our accents, and then the rest will be golden. Great. Okay, so why don't you pull up the slides there, and we'll get stuck into it.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can see this.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so that might be better. So in terms of an agenda for today, the topic obviously is sourcing and tendering. I'm going to do a brief introduction. Then I'm going to set the context. I want to discuss the difference between sourcing and tendering, and also introduce eTendering, so doing everything online. The next couple of sections are the primary aspects of a tender. So you're looking at the tender process. You're going to discuss the people that are involved in the tender, the specification itself, which is often where people start, and finally looking at the evaluation and recommendation. And after that, if there's any questions, we can go to Q&A. I suppose I just want to state today is about tendering for buyers. Suppliers also tender, and salespeople create proposals as a response to tender, and we do that training separately. But today, the focus is for buyers, outlining the steps involved in the tender process, the people looking at the specification and seeing how you can get best practice with regards to evaluation and recommendation. So, as briefly mentioned about the PTI, it is the Procurement Transformation Institute. It was formed by Arvo, which is my business and procurement consultancy, IDEA, which is a training company in Ireland. We are funded by the European Commission, and the collaboration is with the Cork University Business School. So that is part of the university. The focus is to professionalize the procurement profession. Procurement is a function in many businesses which possibly is lacking a professional development career, is lacking training and development, formal education. So that's the need that we're looking to address, be that nationally, internationally, and across our partner network. We do this by providing training courses. We're very keen on generating peer-to-peer learning. Procurement professionals have a lot of internal tacit knowledge which needs to be shared. And the research aspect of what we do is in collaboration with the university. So we started a very interesting research project lately as an example, where we're assessing SME's capability in responding to tenders in Ireland. So throughout Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, we've started this research project, which again will help us to understand the capabilities around tendering, specifically from a supplier point of view, but also looking at the quality of tender suppliers. As James introduced, my name is Mike McGrath. I'm co-founder of PTI, as you've heard about. Arvo is the day job. I'm managing director there. What Arvo is a procurement consultancy. We work with buyers on their procurement strategy. We help them with operationally and tactically around costs and managing tenders. And we also provide training, which led us into the PTI business. I have a role for the last 9 years also with the European Commission, and it's an eTendering role. So it's looking at best practice around eTendering across Europe, and it's writing specifications and recommendations of what the best available technologies can do. And that role came from my technology background prior to that, Supply.ie, which was a simple tendering system. Supply.ie was a simple system to help SMEs to get 3 quotes, which is the basic principle of a tender. So that really just gives you some intro and background. So the first thing we want to discuss is the differences between sourcing, tendering, and e-tendering. As you'll see on top of the screen there is a range of steps involved in the procurement process. Some aspects are related to sourcing, and that's where we would see upfront, where there's a spend analysis, you're looking at the requirements, you're doing the market research. Laterally, once that stage is complete, that's when the tendering follows. And the tendering to us is really bringing requirements into a specification, presenting it to the market, and working it through a process that you can get to a contract, where you're awarding a contract, or you're working with one or a short list of suppliers to deliver the product or service on your behalf. To clarify around tendering, it does cover a range of activities in terms of the types of tenders that are available. Even for you as a buyer and suppliers as well, it's important to understand the type of tender what you're trying to achieve. So look at the objectives. So is it a request for information where there's no commercials involved? You're really just going to the market to find out what capability or what knowledge is in the market. Is it a request for proposal, which was a full-blown tender where you have commercials and information captured in one? Sometimes it's just a pricing aspect. If it's more of a commodity service or product, if it's low value, it might be just a request for bid, which you see in the States, or a request for price, which is more European and global. Or also is it a request for tender? So the RFT or the request for quote are quite similar. So there's a range of 10 types of tenders. So just understand that as well before you do go to market. What is the outcome that you're looking to achieve, and build that into the process. And with regards to e-tendering is simply tendering done online. It's using technology to express, similarly to Procurement Express in terms of managing purchase orders. E-tendering is using technology to remove the paperwork, remove the administration, move away from spreadsheets and emails, and have a system to manage the entire communication throughout the process. So that's just to give you some context. Now, we mentioned about the tender process. If you do a Google of tender process, you will see, I'm going to say nearly 500 million, but it's 400 million results. So there's a lot of information online on tender processes. There's lots of types of tender processes. There's lots of processes which are appropriate for the public sector, which is a very defined process around tendering. The private sector is company by company. The process itself has a different meaning in terms of scope. So some organizations will have a tender process that includes their sourcing activities. Others will just focus on tendering. And some will include even after the contract award. So depending on the scope and even the industry that you're in, the type of process that you have in place will be dictated by those external factors. Also around the spend, the tender process can be quite narrow and could be straightforward if the value of spend is low. But if it's a significant spend for a company or for a supplier, the process is usually more detailed. Even on the process on the right-hand side there's lots of steps involved in that process. It's not that we would recommend. Lots of steps involved, but the nature of some spend and categories of costs would justify that. The tender process would also follow the policy in place. So if the organization has a robust or a defined procurement policy, that may dictate what goes into the process. It may dictate the types of information that needs to be required, the level of engagement with the market. And finally, I suppose that ties into the last point in terms of resources are available. If the team is small, if the procurement team is small, in some organizations it might be one person, then the resources available are quite limited. So there's no point having a significant tender process with multiple steps requiring lots of information if it needs to be managed by one person or a small team. Similarly, with regards to technology, if you have a lot of information to process, you may be best looking at a technology solution. You could run an auction, you could manage it online in terms of a tendering platform. You can do some of the evaluation automatically. You can get suppliers to engage in some very sophisticated pieces of software, and that manages the process through much quicker than as opposed to a manual process, which most organizations thankfully are moving away from. To give you an example of one process, you can see lots of steps involved there. They're probably not very clear, but the process that we would typically follow is on the next screen. And the process that we would recommend looks like this. So it's a simple process with 4 primary stages. In the orange, you can see that there's a pre-tender stage, the actual tender itself, the evaluation, and the awarding contract. You can build this up, or you can strip down in terms of the blue columns underneath. You can remove aspects of it, the tender process, if they're not relevant to your organization. But to me, and in terms of best practice, these are the 4 primary stages of the process. Starting off with the pre-tender, lots of organizations use expressions of interest, or they do some market research, just finding out potentially some of the suppliers in the market. It's good practice. That will help you build the tender documents. We're going to come to this in more detail in terms of the specification. But prior to the tender, you need to be putting together a tender document. You need to understand the requirements, and you need to start collating a document or collating a list, be that online or offline in terms of the system. With regards to the tender itself, there's the publication of the tender, which is getting the tender in front of the right customer, the right suppliers. There's managing the tender through in terms of the communications around it. There's often I've never seen a tender actually being published that doesn't have questions that come back. So some of the questions are straightforward. Sometimes there's a bit more work involved to get the answers. And again, the market would often know best. Buyers sometimes may not be up to date on the best practice with regards to suppliers, with regards to changes in technology, with regards to standards. So it's no harm to push out a tender with the objective of soliciting feedback and getting questions to refine the process as you go through. Then there can be changes to tender, which again, you have a lot more flexibility in the private sector. The public sector can be quite limited in this space, but best practice would mean that you are always learning throughout the process and you're taking supplier input on board. And then the tender closes. So you have a deadline and the tender closes. With regards to evaluation, the tender opening in the private sector is straightforward. In the public sector, there can be a lot more due diligence and control around that. In terms of evaluating the tender, is it one person is evaluating it? You need to put together an evaluation team. Is it the end user? Often procurement may not be using the product or service. So while you manage the tender process, you may not be best placed or best skilled to get the evaluation right. So that tender evaluation piece needs to be managed. Following that, if it's something new or if it's a new supplier, it's important to meet the suppliers. Understand if it's a document that you use in terms of the tender, sometimes multimedia or even a face-to-face or implementation discussion makes a huge difference. And then obviously you're working towards a recommendation for the tender. Depending on your outcomes or what you're trying to achieve, you might be looking to get one supplier, you might be looking to get many suppliers. It might be based on cost, it might be based on quality, it might be based on risk. So you're working towards narrowing the market down to a suitable, appropriate supplier for your needs. And that's where you're going into the awarding contract. We would include at that stage the negotiation aspects of it if the commercials need to be negotiated further. And you're working towards a preferred supplier that you can implement with. So to us, that's a best practice around tender process. It's a high-level 4-stage process. It can be extended in terms of complications and it can be customized to different organizations. But again, it works, it's robust, and it covers all the aspects of what needs to be done. So with regards to people, this is always interesting, of course, because nothing happens without the people involved. The people within the tender process are both internal and external to the company. Internally, you have employees, you have possibly managers involved in the owners of the business, be that shareholders or not. The employees are probably the most important stakeholders to get right internally when you're looking at a tender. You need to get the right buy-in, you need to get the right input, you need to get the right expertise from the company side of the house. So we've been involved in tenders in the past where for some reason or not, a certain department may not have been involved in the tender process. And at the end of the tender, they don't agree with the change or they don't agree with the implementation or how the process was followed. So it can cause consternation and can cause problems and confusion at the end if the right people aren't involved at the start. So when you are running a process for, let's say, telecoms or IT tender, it's important to have the IT department involved. It's important to have end users involved. It's important to have marketing involved, operations, finance, if there's any aspect of quality control. It's important to have the right people involved at the outset. Not everyone will have been involved in the process throughout, but they need to be aware of the tender and what's coming down the track. Externally, if there is a significant change, it may impact our customers. There may be political or economic factors that are affecting the tender, the driver of it. As an example, in Ireland, as James mentioned, we're both Irish, and at the moment in Ireland, one of the big things that is driving a lot of tenders is Brexit. So lots of companies that are dealing with suppliers in the UK are now looking at suppliers further afield, and they're preparing tender documentations, and they're preparing tender documents to bypass potential risks around Brexit. So there may be reasons that trigger a tender, and there's factors and information that need to be brought in, and also your existing suppliers and potential suppliers. If you're in a competitive industry, or if the product that you're going to or service you're going to market for is in a competitive space, you may have a contract in place, but when that contract comes up, you'll have suppliers in the meantime that have been interested. They can share best practice and insights. You can do all this as part of your market research. But I suppose just to recapture this slide, it's important that people are aware of the tender process, of what the outcomes are going to be, and who's involved and where is involved, and how to manage those stakeholders, which is what we do in the next stage. What we do usually in terms of a stakeholder map for significant tenders is we use this quadrant over here. So you're looking at the level of interest and the level of power that people have, and you're putting them into a particular quadrant with regards to the tender and the tender outcome. So it's very important to have the most important people in terms of their influence and impact up here. And be that for a tender, it usually is internally having the right employees in the right space, having sure the management are on board, the board of management if needs be. So it's important that people are aware of the tender and potential outcomes, but they need to understand the risk and the challenges. They need to understand the opportunity of why you're going to tender. So managing those people is vital. I suppose on the opposite side of the house, you have people that have a low interest or low level of power. All they need to do is kept informed of what's happening. So it's worth doing it, and it's worth, before any significant tender, getting the right people, we'll say boxed off or in a particular quadrant, so that you can manage them through the process. And this changes even throughout the tender. At the start, you might have a lot of input from quality control, and you may not see them throughout the process until the evaluation stage. So it's important to understand the role that people play, the impact of the tender on their role and their function, and how to manage that. And that's exactly what the stakeholder map is about. And that's how we manage the people throughout the process. And like I said, I have seen some tender specifications go wrong, but more than often it's around the people. The people are the challenge with going through a tender, because often it does mean change for the company, and managing change is as we know, is a full-time job. So getting that right from the start makes good tendering sense. In terms of the specification, starting on the left-hand side here, the specification is essentially the tender document. It's specifying the exact requirements that are needed. But we would always focus on the outputs in terms of the specification. What are you trying to get out of the tender process? Not really what went into the tender, not really what the functional requirements are, not maybe what the tender looked like the last time around. It's important to focus on the outputs of the tender, so you can build up a specification that the market can engage with. And it's an iterative process. It does take a bit of time to get a specification right. As you see in the bottom left-hand corner, the tender document itself, it has a notice to invite in tender, but also primarily has a commercial specification and a technical specification. In the middle of the screen here, this is a technical specification where you can use user case diagrams. You're pulling up spreadsheets. And there's actually good tools available as well for pulling up specifications. On the right-hand side, you will see the different types of specifications, and depending on your need, depending on the industry, depending on the product or service that you're looking to buy, the functional specification is the most common. For IT, technical related, you're going to end up with a technical specification. The commercial specification is important to understand the price in the commercials, especially if there's different business models available. That's something that we've seen more recently in the last couple of years, where there's different alternative pricing that can be solicited and asked for the market, and different suppliers can be more innovative in that approach. You could be looking at a performance specification or a design specification, again, depending on the product. Other industries require that the brand is named and specified. And certainly there's industry standards that need to be accounted for, depending again on the nature of the product that you're looking to buy. I mentioned at the start of the screen, and I'll reiterate it again, having an output-based specification is the most transformative way, the most innovative way to move a tender along, to get the best outcome for the company. as long as it's managed in terms of the innovation and the risk around that. As an example, most governments these days, or most governments in the past, when they were looking to buy cars or fleet or vans, they would create a tender for 20 cars and 200 vans and X number of motorbikes. What they should be looking for, and what best practice is emerging in different countries, is that it's output based. So instead of looking for cars, they're looking for mobility solutions. So what you're doing is you're putting the pressure on the market in terms of the suppliers to look at innovative solutions. As opposed to buying a car, there might be an alternative. A moped might be most appropriate. It's looking at getting the better value in terms of insights and expertise from the market. It's looking at getting information from the market through primary market research, which may not be available, but it is leading to more innovation. It should lead to better cost reduction and better value, and it does justify doing the tender process in terms of not going to market and buying what you've always bought. It allows innovation to come to play, and as long as the innovation is managed and appropriate, and as long as the risks are managed, then it makes sense to go with an output-based specification. So it's something that there's a growing trend. There's a lot more information available online in terms of output-based specification. We have a lot of templates ourselves for it, and happy to discuss that with anyone at a further stage. So that's the specification, and again, that's the document that leads through the tender process, and be that online or offline. And I suppose the last thing that we just wanted to cover in terms of the stages of what's involved is the evaluation and recommendation. Now, the evaluation doesn't start at the end of the tender process. The evaluation starts at the beginning. And it's important to understand this, and it's important to acknowledge that the evaluation needs to be planned from the start to understand what is the outcome of the tender, where do we want to go. The evaluation needs to be thought through in terms of if you are looking for an innovative solution or an outcome-based specification. I've drafted a kind of evaluation here where you can see different requirements, the criteria, the scoring matrix, and whether it is pass or fail. This is a kind of standard evaluation, and this is very objective, and that's fine. What you don't want is an evaluation that's subjective, and you don't want an evaluation team that don't understand how to evaluate the tender. It's something that is often forgotten about, but if there's work been done on a tender from the start, you're getting the input from different stakeholders in the process. You're able to build up an evaluation matrix, which is very useful in terms of capturing the market, capturing the responses, comparing them fairly and accurately, and being able to walk away with a decision which identifies the best and most appropriate supplier for the service or product. Again, as I said, the evaluation in the past sometimes was kind of a bit haphazard. It's actually worth advising suppliers through the process what the evaluation will look like, so that you are matching the needs of your requirement and of the company. It's something that it requires quite a bit of time. There's some very sophisticated evaluation tools becoming available online. It's something that we've started to use ourselves, and it simplifies the process. And you can get different people with different levels of expertise to evaluate different sections of the tender, and overall you're getting a better decision. And I suppose that's really what you want to be doing with evaluation. It is a tool to get a better decision. With regards to recommendation, it does come down to communication, and it does come down to how you communicate good or bad news at the end of the process. Again, it comes down to what you want to get, what is the outcome of what the message that you're trying to deliver. We have seen some poor recommendations in the past, and sometimes in a public sector environment, those can come back and they can flare up in terms of a challenge. The recommendations that you should be providing to suppliers at the end should be objective. They should be detailed. They should give them information and opportunity to discuss it. And what you want to do is build up the relationship with them, so when the tender comes up again in the future, if they are unsuccessful, that they will engage in the process. Because if they don't engage in the process, and sometimes there's organizations that don't give any recommendation or they don't give any feedback, it's actually going to be difficult in future to get tender responses if you don't engage with the entire process. So a good planned recommendation, be that a letter or a conversation, makes good sense. It's good, it's especially for large tenders, and especially if the market you're looking for has not a huge amount of competition. You may not know when you need to go back to the market again. You may be starting a journey with a new supplier, but if that doesn't persist or last very long, you might be going back to another supplier. So it's important that this communication is delivered right. We would have templates again available if people are interested in writing those recommendations, and making sure that they are engaging, that they're informative, that people are getting value from it. So essentially, that's kind of the 5 steps that we've come through. I'm going to open it up there to the floor in terms of questions. I'm not sure if there's any questions after coming to James at this stage.
Mike, that was really good. I've got a few questions, that's for sure. So I suppose on the public side, that's kind of self-explanatory as to why people should be using procurement. But what sort of size or industry should be looking on the private side at putting a proper procurement in place? Or is it all industries, or are there some industries which are particularly prone or get a particular benefit from a more professionalized procurement function?
Yeah, there's certainly some industries will be more advanced. It depending on the industry driver. So in terms of regards compliance and risk and governance, they would need to be seen to purchase and spend in an appropriate manner. So some of the pharmaceutical industry, even some of the food companies, depending on the nature of what their outputs are, they would be quite good in terms of procurement, and they have very good tendering processes. No, they're appropriate. Like, as in, a small food company is not going to have the same tender process as a multinational, but it is appropriate for what their needs. And it's not just capturing the pricing, the commercials. It's looking at the qualifications, the standards. It's in capturing that information in an objective way that they can make an informed business decision, and they have the suppliers on board. And I suppose what you're looking to do is build partnerships with your suppliers, that you are bringing them through a process, that you're getting the best from the market, and you're building up a partnership with the suppliers, and be that last in terms of contract. And unfortunately, I suppose, with the nature of business and transformation, things change over time. So I suppose not many partnerships are going to last forever these days, and that's no disrespect to the current suppliers. That's just changes in the market. That's just changes in the competition. There might be changes internally as well. So it's important that the tender process is done right, and that there is a positive feeling at the end of it, that people can go to market in the future to engage once again.
So does that mean, I've met a lot of procurement officers that, emphasize the importance of building a relationship with vendors or suppliers. Is that going away because there's more turnover in the market, or is that still important?
No, it's still important. It's still very important. And again, relationships are the backbone of every business, be it internally or externally. The tender is just a process to assimilate information from the market to get the best from the market if it's something that's unknown. But there's very good suppliers that are in a unique position, and depending on the industry that you're in, tendering may or may not be part of the core, be part of the course. But more and more for commodity products and services, people do use tenders to work through the process. In terms of relationships and partnerships, and depending on the value that's been delivered, good suppliers and they actually don't fear a tender. They understand they're being benchmarked, and they see the opportunity to improve. They see the opportunity to learn about the buyer's inert problems. It allows them to work through the process. And if they're on side, if they've their homework done, then they'll come out on top as well.
Okay, and I've just one more question then, which is, here at Procurement Express, one of our core values is relentless improvement, and I'm a big fan of making small improvements over time makes a big impact. For people going away from this webinar today, if they could only is there something they could do in half a day, or something something bite-sized, if you like, rather than eating the elephant, that could make a difference, start making a difference in our organization this quarter?
Yeah, I suppose the one thing I mentioned there, which we don't see a lot of organizations, that tender process, just having a one-pager. If you want to take away something short and snappy, just create a one-pager in terms of the tender process that's appropriate for the company, that when they are spending money, and when they are going to market, that they have steps to follow. And whether they're buying stationery, whether they're buying IT, whether they're buying insurance, that the steps are being followed. Over time, that process will evolve, but just start small, start by a definitive process. And again, like I said, we have templates, there's other templates available that we can help organizations build that tender process.
Great. So how can people reach out to you, Mike?
Yeah, just bring it back up the screen there. Just, I suppose, two things. With PTI, or Procurement Transformation Institute, we're starting to create a community. We've a community online at community.procureti.com. It's an online forum of buyers, full-time and part-time. There's templates on there. There's free information of people to engage, ask questions, and work through the process in terms of the tendering and learn from the peers. Also, we do provide training, as this would outline today. We have a sample of what we're doing in terms of sourcing and tendering. This was half an hour. We do this over the course of a day, so there's a lot more information. We walk through some good case studies. We have a lot of training courses that are available, delivered in classroom. We do some bespoke training. And again, if people want to contact us with regards to any training courses, the contact details are here. We are social, and we obviously have the contacts by the traditional email and website as well. So that really kind of summarizes the contact details, and very happy to engage with anyone that has a sourcing or tendering challenge.
That's great stuff. Okay, well, Mike, thank you very much for coming with us today. I think it was a very valuable overview. Yeah, it was a bit of fun as well. What else are you going to do on a Thursday afternoon? So thanks for everyone for tuning in. And like I said, feel free to reach out to Mike or myself. You can get me, james.kennedy@procurementexpress.com. And we will update you with possibly some more content in the future. Yeah, everyone, have a great day, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, James. Thanks all.